Hi, Shaun. Thanks for coming today on my very first podcast. I can see you're inspecting the magical fur.
Yeah, it's like a marsupial from Australia,
Oh, okay. All right. What is that?
like a koala or something. You don't know what a marsupial is?
No.
I'm gonna have to
Wait.
get you the official destination.
Let me earmark that.
Yeah.
Let's start with you first. So, Shaun, thanks for coming today to my podcast. And it's my first podcast I've ever done in my life. And Shaun is a good friend of mine who is now going to talk to me about life in Indonesia.
Wow,
The
what a
good
topic.
things, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of all three. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of ugly.
I think for the purpose of keeping everything a little bit balanced, we should keep the good and the ugly balanced as well. I guess yin yang.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's a lot of bad stuff here.
I think it
around, right?
naturally does anyway.
Actually,
Yeah.
it does. And like eventually humans tend to kind of like level out, right? Or not just humans.
Or you don't survive here for this long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those who think it's all bad and ugly, they've long gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump right into it. So, tell us more about you, like when you started, where you started, and how you ended up.
I'm probably relatively a little bit of a newbie in Indonesia. I've only been living here full time for 8 years, but I've been working predominantly in Indonesia since 2005. So unlike the majority of expats who are here, I don't work in kind of traditional corporate sectors, or I'm not one of the Bali expats. I work in international development, which is not uncommon, but specifically in education area. So I run a research institute, and predominantly that's in areas of education, higher education, vocational education and training, but also have done quite a lot of work in other areas of development like tobacco control, maternal mortality, food sustainability and environmental sustainability as well. So a relatively broad collection of research capabilities.
Interesting. Okay, so and then you basically started the business over here.
I did. I started a research institute back in 2013. It was slow going at first, but it's been relatively stable for the last 4 or 5 years. My clients are mostly state and federal governments in Australia, and sometimes some other companies as well, some other countries as well. I do some work for some NGOs.
Okay.
And
Australian or any NGO?
No, actually, I've done a lot of work, believe it or not, with India.
Okay.
Who collaborate on some projects where there are similar issues in India, like maternal mortality and like tobacco-related control and those kinds of issues.
Interesting. Okay, so
and with some of the UN agencies as well, like RED and some others.
but currently you're active in the educational sector. So
Yeah, we were always relatively active in the education division. We actually have a division entirely dedicated to education. So we support international universities in terms of both outbound and inbound student mobility. And we also do a lot of sort of market entry and market-based research for international universities.
okay, and that's basically something you now do as a main thing, or I mean pre-COVID. What's the situation?
Yeah, it's I've been lucky enough to have some substantial long-term contracts with a consortium of universities in Australia, and I also now act just recently. Actually, I started only this week as a senior advisor to the ASEAN region for one of the biggest universities in Australia,
Which is
Curtin University in Perth.
All right.
Curtin's a university with around about 60,000 students spread across campuses in the Indian Ocean area. So Perth is their main campus in Western Australia. They've also got campuses in Malaysia, in Mauritius, and in Singapore.
Okay, that's quite a large network. So here in Indonesia, you do what exactly in order to like help students? That's what I understand of. Like
Yeah,
is doing?
My role is more to do with strategy for those universities.
Yeah.
So it's more in the space of ideas and business development and research development. So research links, government to government kind of work. A lot of work in connecting the corporate sector and the industry sector to universities as well.
Okay.
So it's a relatively diverse sort of areas of responsibility. In terms of the student space, there are different people who are actively involved in the recruitment of students and those kinds of things. The work that I'm doing is more involved in partnerships. I'll be working on a feasibility study for the establishment of a campus here in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And there's already a very big campus focused on engineering in Malaysia. And Kurtze are looking towards the development of a campus here in Indonesia as well. And that's an example of some of the work that I'll be doing.
Okay, cool. So jumping right into the good stuff. So what is it that, like, the number one thing, or like, give me a list of things that you really like over here.
Yeah, it's a good question, you know. Indonesia, like any place where you don't necessarily know your way around so much, it's filled with a lot of complications, and it's easy to forget some of the wonderful aspects of this life. Number one is, I think if you're the kind of person that the idea of difference, you know, like the idea that every day can be filled with surprises, and different, and a place that continually keeps you on your toes, where rage and joy coexist in each day, then this is the place for you.
Yeah.
And I like that. Other than the natural environment of Indonesia, the diversity of Indonesia, the kind of diversity of culture and experiences that you get to have.
Yeah.
Just being somewhere different is something that, in my experience, you find people for whom it terrifies. And they can't wait to get home to where things are safe and comfortable and familiar.
It's not a place for it's not a safe space here. That's for sure.
No, it's,
but in a sense, I think it is also very safe in terms of safety. Like compared to other developing countries, you can walk around at night over here without a problem.
I find I've lived in I guess 11 countries now around the world, and I certainly believe that Indonesia is one of the safest places I've ever experienced.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've rarely felt in any kind of danger here.
I've heard stories from Manila. So Philippines seems to be quite a crazy place. They have a very liberal approach towards gun laws.
Yeah, I've been to the Philippines a number of times, but I've not lived there, and certainly your sense of well-being is a little bit different in the Philippines than in Indonesia. I actually lived in Africa for quite a while as well,
Okay.
And that's certainly at new levels. I mean, I lived in Botswana and the Seychelles; those were two enormously safe places to be. But other parts of Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, these kinds of places, they're a little on the terrifying side at times.
So it's kind of safe over here, but not certain. That's basically, I think.
It's a good way of describing it. It's safe, but certainly not certain. There's a comedian named Stephen Wright, and he's got a really interesting analogy. You know, have you ever swung back on your chair? You know, like on the back two legs. You know, one of the normal chairs, not some way back like this.
I did this at school. Like
we used to swing back on your chair, and you swing just a little bit too far, and you almost fall, but you catch yourself just in time. That's what every day is like in Indonesia.
True. In a sense, it is. Yeah, it's kind of like walking on the edge.
Yeah. You're just and for a lot of people, that's an invigorating feeling.
For me, it is. I mean, when I came here 10 years ago, to me, it felt like Wild Wild West or Wild Wild East in that sense.
Yeah, and you've been here longer than I have. I've only been living for 8 years full time. But certainly the changes since 2005 have been substantial. And, you know, when you have, it's only when you kind of reflect on what life was like back then that you kind of take it all in your stride and understand that a lot has changed.
Primarily, I guess it comes down to the fact that the last 10 years were years of like boom of progress of where Indonesia started to kind of like move forward economically and socially, I guess. Well, not necessarily socially, but economically for sure, right?
Sure. And the interesting thing about that idea is we have concurrently lived in a decade that had both substantial growth and development, but also it's the space in which Indonesia hit the technology boom as well.
Yeah.
Where the rapid expansion of access to information occurred in the 10 years that you and I were here.
Yeah.
Apps, the mega apps and app development, and the sort of space that you're more accustomed to working in. And not just apps and sort of like the expansion of the digital economy, but the majority of the population have had accessible access to information, and that's changed the shape of Indonesia quite a lot as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like a practical example of that is the last 10 years, everyone who was 6 who is now 16 is exceedingly more proficient in English language than any generation that's preceded them. Simply because they're connected to these devices that have given them YouTube and every other access to information. So that's changed.
I find the internet here is fairly, there are certain restrictions which are kind of very easy to circumvent, and then also laughable in its kind of reasoning, right? So when you hear about...
It's remarkably open, though.
Yeah, it's remarkably open. Like, you have barely anything that you can't do. Like, I can do a lot more than I could do in Germany. In Germany, you have to be a little bit careful. It's a bit more walking on eggshells, especially when it comes to downloading certain content. But over here, it's just free. Like, I can do whatever I want, more or less, and there's never any fear of repercussion, right? So this is something...
Yeah, it's things are relatively... free and transparent here. Of course, the downside of that is that's not necessarily so good if you're the owner of intellectual property.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, which I am actually, and I do see my products, and I have digital products that I'm selling. In the market, in certain marketplaces, and they're being repackaged, or actually not even repacked. They're just using
stolen.
Stolen. They use my logo and everything. Appropriated. They use it and sell it here on Tokopedia, which is the Indonesian equivalent of Amazon. And I have to manually shut them down. So I have to do. I have to threaten them. Not with violence. Not like I just have to say, take it down or else.
Yeah,
and then they work.
And there has been a lot of progress made in that space. Australia and Indonesia have recently signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which is essentially a kind of free trade agreement, which has removed a lot of tariffs that were in place to strengthen the interactions between Australia and Indonesia. And a big part of that was some provisions for the protection of intellectual property.
There's a funny side story I can tell you. A couple of years ago, Bill Gates came over and spoke with the president in order to address a few issues around that topic. And there was this finding by an international security analytics group that figured out that most attacks, DDoS attacks on servers or on infrastructure around the world, like mostly in the US, but also Europe, originated from Indonesia. So you would think, okay, Indonesia is it's a place full of hackers. No, it is actually a place full of hacked hardware, probably hacked by Chinese or other countries, and they like these machines are used in order to carry out.
Indonesia is somewhat of an intermediary in this space.
Unknowingly. So that's the story, and mainly simply because when you didn't register or kind of unlock your Windows or activate your Windows, these machines became prone to attacks, right? So all these backdoors were wide open, and hackers could just walk in and install all these Trojans and malware, which then could be used in order to carry out attacks around the world, and that basically sparked almost like an international crisis, because Indonesia was like a hornet's nest of attacks, and but Indonesians didn't know about this,
right?
So
and it's one of the aspects of Indonesia that I appreciate so much actually is that despite the enormous size of Indonesia, now for those who haven't been to Indonesia or who have perhaps only travelled to Bali, they might not quite understand just how huge the archipelago is.
Yeah.
I mean, it stretches some 5,000 or 6,000 kilometres from east to west.
Yeah.
34 provinces, is it?
Yeah.
I've been to almost all of the provinces in Indonesia, and it has surprised me how rapidly Indonesia has deployed access to information in most of the parts of the archipelago. There are still a few places where you can only just get 3G kind of access, even as far as some of the remote islands in Maluku that I've been to that still have got reasonable 3G access, maybe not LTE or sort of a broader band access, but surprisingly the infrastructure here, and it's like many developing countries, it kind of leapfrogged. There weren't a lot of cables, and there was never going to be the infrastructure for cables, so everything went directly to cellular.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was definitely a leapfrogging experience for me as well. I was surprised. In the beginning, initially, it was awful. Like, internet was pretty awful, but like the way it developed, especially around 2011 until 2015, was remarkable. Like, that was like every time I returned to Germany, using my cell phone would be just a horrible experience, like compared to over here, right? Here I watch HD TV on my phone and I pay a month maybe 10, 15 euros or dollars.
Sure, exactly. And the same, certainly the subscription. And that's one of the luxuries that Indonesia enjoys. It has hundreds of millions of phone subscribers, and the capacity for that, and that brings with it economies of scale, competition, and also I think the I've done a little bit of work with the Ministry of Communications and Information, and they have a multi-trillion rupiah program for infrastructure development, and I think we'll see the rapid deployment of 5G sooner than later.
I say let's call this part 1. Part 2 we have to do inside, because we're going to get hammered with tropical rain, I think, any second. Do you see this cloud?
We can, for those of us who have been here long enough, of course, you can feel it coming, right?
Yeah, you can definitely feel it coming. I can already see it coming. So there's a huge wall of rain moving towards us.
And we're a little bit exposed here, so we might get a shower, but let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Do you want to take the risk? Okay, so this is part 2 of our podcast number 1. We had to jump inside, and now we're going to talk about, I guess...
Where were we up to? It's rainy season, and we got to watch a beautiful sheet or wall of rain slowly make its way towards us.
Yeah, well, I mean, I live up here in the mountains. It's 1,200 meters, or no, 1,000 meters. It's pretty much exactly 1,000 meters above sea level here. When the clouds roll in, you can literally like see them coming, and then you can set your watch to like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and you know exactly it's going to come down.
And this year's been nice. We haven't had a good rainy season for a few years now.
Okay, yeah, this year was pretty wet, I'd say.
Yeah,
as well.
It's been a wet year this year, but the last sort of 3 years at least haven't been particularly wet at all.
Do you think so? I think 2015.
Yeah, we missed a year of rain almost entirely.
In 2015 it was, right?
I think 2018.
Was it?
Yeah.
Because I remember 2015 we had these amazing, well, quote unquote amazing peatland fires in Sumatra.
Yeah, those.
Or was that 2016?
Well, those have been regularly. They've had a big one of those, for I think their first one was in 2014 or 13.
Yeah.
And I read a few years ago the UN report on those wildfires. There were an estimated 100,000 deaths attributed entirely, and that they were Indonesian deaths only, attributed to those fires. The most recent ones...
Due to health, I guess.
Most of them were related to respiratory complications associated with that.
Yeah.
At the time, Indonesia was the only country in the world in which chronic obstructive pulmonary disease (COPD) was the leading cause of preventable death.
Yeah, I know someone. I know someone from the so-called Fire Free Alliance. It's a project set up here in Indonesia, ironically, along with some palm oil companies. Oh no, wait, not palm oil companies. Like a big player in textile source material production, which is made,
Right.
which is made from these trees. I forgot the name. But the interesting thing about that project is that they instead of using punishment, they used incentives for locals to put out fires before they become big.
And I think that's the key in Indonesia, is the same kind of rules of law and order.
Yeah.
They don't really exist so much.
So now segueing into the bad or the ugly of Indonesia. So what is the...
Well, I think you just kind of touched on it, on one of the points of it there, and that was the issue of the forest fires. When you the first few years that you're here in Indonesia, I think you tend to focus on the individual issues, the small issues,
Yeah.
the irritants, the things that just make you want to tear your hair out and scream, the traffic, the burning of the trash every day.
Yeah.
And I kind of used to put them into a box that says, this problem is eminently solvable without having to do anything. When I read a report several years ago, I lived in Jakarta when I first came. So I moved to Jakarta and only moved after the first 2 or 3 years to Bandung from Jakarta. I still commute to Jakarta every week to work for a few days, but it's an intolerably inhumane city to base your life.
Yeah.
During this crazy COVID pandemic, things are a little bit quieter. But I read a report, some researchers used satellite imagery and other kind of information systems to look at the traffic problems. Where were the problems? And the interesting outcome of that was that 70% of all of the traffic problems were solvable without any money or infrastructure development. They were behavior-made problems. They were eminently solvable. And my biggest frustration in Indonesia are not the problems that require more money than Indonesia's got to solve them, but my biggest frustration are the problems that are eminently solvable just with action.
Yeah.
And one of those is the burning of trash.
Yeah.
The burning of rice husks, for instance. When you know many other international jurisdictions value add those rice husks and turn them into feedstock for livestock or other value added projects. And here they're just slashed, put into big piles and burnt, which covers most of the nation in that particular season with clouds of intolerably dangerous smoke.
Yeah.
And likewise with just domestic trash.
Yeah.
The custom in Indonesia is to take all of the trash that is plastic or paper or and burn it. And it's technically illegal in some parts, like it is in Bandung, but it's common practice.
It's a predicament for especially remote areas. There's no trash management.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the solutions for those things, I believe that there's probably cost-effective ways of managing waste that are not going to require massive investments. I think there are probably some industries around waste, and we've started to see those emerge. In my neighborhood, I have someone come and collect everything that's recyclable.
There
plastic,
is a certain
and
degree of recycling going on here.
yeah.
Plastic. I mean, not all sorts of plastic, but plastic bottles are collected. They are being recycled. Actually.
and cardboard.
Yeah. Cardboard.
We separate cardboard and plastic, put it into a pile, and an older lady comes by the house to pick it up.
Yeah.
And she sells it. She on-sells it, and it's a cottage industry for her.
Would be quite interesting to figure out whether the degree of recycling over here is actually higher than in the West. It may be higher. But the problem is because a lot of trash is not being recycled or managed properly, it becomes so visual. Like you see it everywhere, so you think it's a very trashed up, and it is a trashed up place. Like don't get me wrong. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
see
it's trash
everywhere.
up.
Yeah,
There's
but
piles of trash everywhere.
yeah, and then when you see the dump sites, it just looks like from a horror movie, like a scene from a horror movie where you think this will never, this this is unsolvable.
Well, it's estimated that 500 tons, and I think a part of this, when you look at the complex problems, the longer you hear, the more you start to look at them in a historical, sort of political context. If you think about Indonesia even 50 years ago, food packaging was largely banana leaves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you would take that food packaging and you would throw it down a ravine and it would make its way back into the ecosystem from where it came.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know the way that traditional food was packaged was banana leaves or some other leaf, and it had a bamboo skewer going through it or a grass kind of skewer.
Yeah.
And it was fine to throw that down a ravine.
Or it just ended up behind the house. So nowadays, when you go through those kampungs, you see the same thing behind the house, but
Piles
it's just
of plastic.
Yeah, it's plastic. So they treat plastic the same as banana leaves.
They had always done with biodegradable packaging.
Yeah. So one solution or one idea of a solution may be to make all packaging biodegradable.
Well, correct. And this is where I think Indonesia will have to arrive at. I don't think that I think that that's a more achievable solution than waste management is going to be.
Yeah, because there's this word which I always love saying is a word that doesn't work in Indonesia, which is management. So waste management requires management, and at that point it already falls apart, so it doesn't work.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or large-scale coordination. And I think what we've seen from Jokowi the president of Indonesia in the last few years, particularly given his second term, is he has come to the realization that he has to devolve more and more of Indonesia's development to the private sector.
Yeah.
So we've seen this transition from areas that I'm involved in, like skills training and development. They've created tax incentives, 200% tax incentive for industries to take control of training and development.
Yeah.
Same with research and development, a 300% tax rebate for that to occur.
Yeah.
I think that the private sector, particularly the food producers, they require regulation to have control over packaging.
Yeah.
It's unsustainable the way that it is.
Absolutely.
And it's not only, it's a global problem. Indonesia's waste is a problem for the world.
Yeah.
And it's a very real problem for Australia, a near neighbour, for instance. There's a big resort off the coast of the Northern Territory that had to shut down because it was inundated with 12 tonne a month of plastic waste from Indonesia.
Yeah.
So this is a global problem.
Yeah, these pictures are like going around divers in Bali swimming through garbage, basically. So
yeah, I mean, I was in Lombok last year, and I've got a video that I like to show people of the amount of trash in Sengigi Bay in the beach there.
Yeah.
Just flowing into from the river outlets that are there. It comes from high up, makes its way down, and just pours into that river.
Yeah.
You literally could not go on a boat from Sengigi up to the Gili Islands. You couldn't go more than a metre without seeing plastic waste. Really a devastating scenario.
It's quite awful. And I mean, in Bali, there's some level of management, I've heard. Do you know anything about it?
I was in Bali just recently, and listen, I think it's probably better. There are some policies, for instance, like there are no plastic bags and no plastic straws allowed in Bali.
Yeah.
But it hasn't stopped the waste making its way onto the beaches.
Yeah.
Bali is too geographically small to have a large-scale and sustainable impact on plastic waste.
Yeah.
And there are still many other forms of plastic waste. And the real problem is packaging. You know, my experience has been that the plastic bag thing is a bit of a false false flag in many senses.
Yeah.
Because my experience is that people tend to keep plastic bags and reuse them again.
Yeah.
There was certainly a lot of them getting trashed, but my experience of traveling around Indonesia for a long time is packaging is the culprit.
Yeah. And
shampoo bottles and the the one-use kind of plastic squeezy things. One cup of coffee in one separate.
Yeah. So the
package
things you can buy here, quite interestingly, like they're a lot smaller than, for example, in the West. So
One
you
use,
use so you use them like once or like 3 times or 5 times, and then you chuck them away, and it's like it's everywhere. Like these small shampoo bottles. Or
it's
drink
indicative
bottles.
of the coffee you will see in kampungs here. The perforated edges of one package. You go and buy one pack of coffee for 1 cup, one single use of shampoo or soap, or one cigarette. And this is commonplace throughout Indonesia, because for a large proportion of the vulnerably employed in Indonesia, you eat and consume what you earned today.
Yeah,
and that's what's made COVID a particularly difficult challenge for Indonesia and shutting down.
It's interesting to think about this in a behavioral way. So I see cars, I like driving around where trash is flying out of the window like all the time. It's not
every day.
I mean, it's something that happens in the West as well. I mean, you see trashed up side skirts in like rural areas as well, right? Where truckers like throw their trash out of the window as well. But here, it literally happens anywhere. And sometimes I see cars stopping by a trash bin and just dumping their stuff in there, like their household trash in the middle of a road.
Sure.
Because either they have to pay for it in order to get rid of it, or they have to burn it in front of their house, so they don't want that either. So they kind of carry it somewhere else.
Do you pay for waste management here?
We pay, that's part of the resort.
I pay as well.
Yeah. So in resorts or in sort of controlled or managed clusters.
What do you think happens with it?
Well, it ends up in the same space, like
in a landfill, or gets burned.
Yeah. Well, in a landfill, partially recycled. These trucks over here, these trucks are fascinating. They're kind of like driving little recycling machines, right? They have like these 3 or 4 or 5 guys sitting on the top, and then just sifting through your trash and like trying to find anything reusable
and sorting it out.
And sorting it out and then selling it on. Or what I know is that a lot of companies here that produce plastic, they recycle plastic as well. So they kind of turn it into pellets and then use it for lower grade plastic applications.
Now you're from Germany, and my brother's living in Switzerland and has got a house in Germany across the border in the Bodensee, and I'm always intrigued when I go there. There's industrial scale incentivization for recycling lots of things in Indonesia, in Germany, right? Glass bottles particularly. You pick them up and you take them to the supermarket, and there's these automated machines, right? You throw the glass in there and it returns you dollars or credit on your...
Well, that's for bottles with where you get money for it. Like so there are bottles with refund and those without refund.
Right, okay.
And those without, like wine bottles, for example, we have these special containers for white, brown, and green glasses where you then chuck them in, and that's... I don't know exactly how they can reuse it. What I know is that if there's only a single green bottle in a brown bottle container, the whole thing is fucked. So but that's a different topic. Recycling here is definitely not at the same level like other countries.
But I think the point that I was making is that I think that you have to create financial incentives for recycling. And I think that that's the way, create a market for it. And it has to be a market-based solution here.
Well, as soon as money exchange hands, you have a situation where often people trying to take shortcuts, right? So So I mean, I've been thinking about this as well before. Would it work to have this kind of refund system here in Indonesia, like we have in Germany?
I don't necessarily think that would work, but I think it's one of those issues that requires the government to implement regulations, put regulation in place, and then let the market determine the solutions for that. I don't think the big consumer companies, the Unilevers and the others, I don't think that they're doing enough. Indo Foods, those things. I don't think they're doing enough to deal with the issue of waste.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the government needs to step in, define the parameters that will dramatically minimize the amount of waste, and then let the market determine that.
Well, I mean, that sounds too good to be true, which is a perfect segue into the other part of Indonesia that is not so nice. So whenever the government is trying to fix something, it often makes things worse. So, i.e. corruption, right? So like in this scenario, I can imagine like you would put these new regulations in place and then someone would pay off someone else in order to alter certain laws in order to make like leaving back doors open for producers to go without impunity.
When I'm talking to groups of students, particularly when I engage quite frequently, as I do with prospective PhD students, one of the questions that I like to ask sort of young Indonesian people who are engaged in the process of determining a future career that's about solving some of these big national problems, I like to ask them if they were to list the top 5 big picture problems that Indonesia faces, what would they be? So I want to pose the same question to you. You've been here for 10 years. What are the 5 biggest problems that Indonesia has got to solve?
Well, a lot of problems kind of are intertwined with each other, right? So if you solve,
absolutely true.
if you only try to solve one, it'll not work if you don't solve the others, right? So
Correct, yeah.
First, figuring out a sort of map to kind of follow, to unpack all this, and then sequentially or in parallel work it all off. One would be definitely education. So, and that's something Indonesia has been working on before, right? Like they have like one of the highest teacher per capita rate in the world. Yet the performance is quite, underwhelming.
Yeah. Do you know about PISA?
Yeah.
PISA is the UNESCO international benchmarking of performance of students' capabilities in maths, science, reading, etc., etc. Indonesia it continues to perform poorly.
Yeah.
Like in the bottom 5%.
Okay.
In terms of competencies in education. Now, a lot of people are surprised by that because the biggest cities tend to do quite well. But of course, it's aggregated across all the provinces.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's absolutely right up there with my top 5 as well, because a lot of solutions will stem from the resolution of improvements in education.
Yeah.
So I think that education is one of those great enablers. It will solve or will contribute towards the resolution of many other problems.
Yeah,
so education 1, what's number 2?
Number 2, so it's like standing in front of a forest, like pick a tree, right? So that's kind of like how I see it. It's just a mountain of problems.
And so I guess the question is, which are the biggest 5 trees?
The biggest 5 trees, definitely education is number 1.
Yeah.
Number 2 would be, well, you can't, like, is corruption a tree? Not really, right? It's
absolutely.
It's the fungus underneath, right?
Yeah, no, it's however you want to create a metaphor or analogy out of it, it's definitely one of the issues.
Yeah.
Because one of the impediments to solving all the others, of course, is corruption. It earlier on this morning over text when you sent me something, I mentioned the efficient grease theory or hypothesis.
Yeah.
And Fadlizon is I think is deputy speaker of the House now.
Yeah.
But not many people are also aware that Fadlizon is also Indonesia's representative in an organization called GOPEC, which is like an organization for the Global Organization for Parliamentarians Against Corruption. Yet his association with corruption is relatively plentiful. And of course, we're very cautious about what we say on this subject. But he was famous for once saying what do you want? Do you want no development and no corruption, or do you want a little bit of corruption and some development?
Yeah, definitely.
And sort of suggesting that corruption is the grease that oils the machine of development.
Yeah, it's realpolitik if you think about it, right? So you can't just be naive and think, okay, we just stamp out corruption and then everything is going to be fine. It's not going to work.
Correct. And listen, I think that perpetrators of corruption love to quote this hypothesis, idea, saying that corruption is essential to development.
Absolutely,
well, of course, they believe that. The reality is, I don't subscribe to that model.
Yeah.
I think that that at almost every level, it is the most substantial hindrance to development and democracy and peace and stability and sustainability in Indonesia.
Yeah, I mean,
and we have to deal with it.
Good proof of that is actually those few years where Jokowi and Ahok were ruling Jakarta. Unfortunately, Ahok had to go. But in these years, corruption was sort of like pushed down. It was very hard to get into a government job the usual way with bribes. It didn't work. You had to actually qualify. You had to pass tests. And then in that period of time,
a concurrent boom in development, right?
like Jakarta was moving forward. Things were like easing
progress.
Off. Yeah, it was like you could watch it with your own
plans,
eyes.
Dealing with the flooding, dealing with public transportation, and a range of these things. Like many other areas that were well developed and stuff like that. Yes, certainly.
So
and there are many examples of it, but unfortunately, there's a powerful vested interest in corruption continuing.
Yeah.
And Ahok was, much has been written in the international academic media and local media about the Ahok period of time.
Yeah.
And the reality is he was perhaps the greatest obstacle to the continuation of the oligarchs and the ruling classes sort of and the continuation of corruption.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he had to go.
I mean, so if you ask me, okay, what is the second second biggest tree? Then, if you want to point a finger at it, it would be Jakarta, because I mean, there's the saying like a fish stinks from the head, right? If you have a city like, for example, Solo or other cities that are actually well managed and clean, those can become like examples for the entire region or the entire country. Now, Jakarta is a very bad example. So I think if you would fix Jakarta, that would create some sort of knock-on effect on the rest of the country to kind of like pull up the straps and get things cleaned up.
Now, of course, the plans are underway, of course, to relocate Jakarta, the capital. Well, not relocate Jakarta, but relocate the capital to Kalimantan.
Well, that's not a solution. That's just running away from the problem, and then Jakarta will still be the largest city in Indonesia.
But do you think? The initial plans put it at somewhere in the order of 2 million people transmigrating from Jakarta to Kalimantan. But do you think symbolically it could have some effect in terms of the machine of government having a fresh start in a fresh location?
Sure. I mean, you can always buy a new PC if your old one doesn't work properly anymore, right? So that in that sense, it could work. You could undo a lot of what's the English word for a fur ball full of what cats are playing with. What's that called?
Well, cats get a fur ball when they eat too much fur and they cough it up.
No, that's a fur ball. Well, that's what Jakarta is.
Like a ball of wool.
So in a sense, what the government is trying to do, they're trying to get like a tabula rasa, right? Like a clean table, and then start orderly, and at least to get the governance of the country in check, so to say, right? Because right now in Jakarta, it's just a disaster, right? Because like business, other interests, military, everything is just crammed together, and it's sort of working, but in my eyes, Jakarta is a zombie. It's just
it's not my place. It's by no means my favorite part of Indonesia, but there has also been some remarkable progress in some parts of it. I go walking at night after work in Jakarta. And when I first arrived, you just couldn't walk anywhere.
Yeah.
There was no place you could walk. Now there are like international standard pedestrian ways that cover large parts of big central Jakarta.
At least central Jakarta.
Yeah, central Jakarta. Of course, getting into those kinds of places, but the MRT, of course, is great. I use it all the time. I take public transportation.
The MRT is great, yeah, absolutely.
So there's been some progress in that place, and it's a more livable place than it was beforehand. But yes, certainly, my view about corruption is that that it will get to the point. I think that the point about Jakarta is that is this idea that I stumbled across many years ago called environmental anarchapitalism, sort of this philosophical term that kind of describes an economic survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And in many respects, I think that nature will determine, or is already determining, what will happen with Jakarta. We know that it's sinking large parts of it.
Yeah.
And if you look at the subsidence map of Jakarta, and you see the levels that are sinking quite rapidly, and in some instances 5 meters over the course of the last 30 years.
Yeah.
I think what will eventually happen is the citizens will speak.
So, soil compression due to water extraction, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's no scheme water. So everyone digs a well and they suck water out of the ground.
Yeah.
And in some instances, like the towers, they're sucking out literally thousands and thousands of liters an hour for cooling towers alone. For old, inefficient cooling towers in Jakarta. And everyone has to...
While simultaneously sinking into
well, of course, it's not one aquifer. The subsidence under the ground is like these pockets of soil, and then pockets of aquifers and pockets of soil. Yeah. And of course, when you suck the water out of those things, the soil collapses and it just keeps coming down.
Yeah.
Of course, that coupled with rises in sea levels, which has already flooded parts of North Jakarta as it is, and air quality that's just not sustainable, and people will evacuate of their own accord because, I've got friends and colleagues who left Jakarta simply because they couldn't breathe anymore. And it was
air quality is pretty bad. Just recently, they opened a new coal power plant nearby, not in Jakarta, like outside Jakarta. And in the planning, they didn't consider winds. So despite the lockdown in March, April this year here in Jakarta, air quality, like worldwide, air quality went up. Like it got a lot better, especially in India. Like
improved.
You could see Mount Everest again from India. Like remarkable photos went around the internet.
Yeah,
right?
from Nepal too.
It's amazing, except Jakarta. Like in Jakarta, air quality went down despite no traffic. So that's primarily due to these new power plants nearby, or that one particular power plant nearby. So coal. So environment. Like if you ask me, okay. Education, corruption. The third one would be increase the standard for environmental protection. That would be a big plus for the country, because they've done it. Like the fishing ministry, they kind of improved the entire situation around fishing to make it more sustainable. To instead of like just fishing off the entire archipelago, it's now a lot more restricted. They can't just do the crazy fishing they used to do for like 50 years or even longer. And now the kind of fish, the fish stock's going up actually around Indonesia. Surprisingly,
right. Interesting. I read recently that Indonesia has got the most biodiversity of marine life of any country in the world.
Yeah, that's just due to the
its vast marine ecosystem.
17,000 islands. So you have a lot of opportunity for life to kind of like live nearby the shores, because that's the ideal place to live at, right?
Yeah, still a lot of threat, but certainly dealing with the environment is a major issue.
Yeah.
And on that point, I think you kind of answered one of my other questions with this issue of the environment. I think that it will ultimately take mechanisms of international pressure. At the moment, the international community is largely taken the position that it needs to be a cooperative partner with Indonesia.
Yeah.
and it needs to build local capacity. It needs to do a whole lot of things to improve the direction in which it's heading.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the view of Australia. And there's been some like magnificently successful projects in this space that I've witnessed or been a part of. Projects like the Empowerment of Women project, projects in education, projects around infrastructure for regional development in the eastern part of Indonesia. This fantastic road infrastructure that was built from Mataram up the sort of western coast of Lombok, which gave birth to a whole lot of hospitality and tourism projects along that area right up to Bangsal Port. And infrastructure was the key. So there's been a lot of success stories, and we're in that phase. But I think it will, my take on this is that it will eventually get to the point where we move to more punitive measures because the stakes will become so high.
Yeah.
And I'm referring mostly to the areas of energy and carbon emissions and deforestation and ocean sustainability. Right? Those kinds of main environmental flashpoints of sort of catastrophe. And I think it will probably go one of two ways. Either Indonesia will recognize that this is going to get them into, that this is unsustainable in themselves, for their own sort of national security. Or it may get to the point where the international community impose hardcore sanctions on those who continue to promulgate environmental sort of catastrophes like large swathes of deforestation. I was hiking last weekend. I've got a question on this point. I took with me a map of the Taman Nasional Halimun Salak, one of the biggest national parks in Indonesia. And I took the map with me, and I was confused about the rapid rate of development into the national park zone. Resorts, hotels, camping sites, villas, all now built inside the national park boundary. Well, restaurants, warungs, communities, farming projects, all these things built within the... So I'm wondering, and I've seen this in other places. You see it in Bromo Tengah National Park in East Java and other parts as well. So I'm
But is a national park the same as a natural reserve?
I don't know the answer to the rules and regulations
because
that
would
govern.
make a difference, right?
Because of course, as you know it, now Germany, I've recently read, has 30% of its landmass is designated national parks, protected national parks.
Oh, is that much? I thought...
Yeah, it's high. It's high. France, I think, is around 25%.
Yeah.
So it's particularly high. Indonesia is way less than 10%, but only about 3% if you take the marine protected areas out of the equation.
Oh, so if you take these...
So it's very low in terms of the land area.
Yeah.
So there's not much of it left either. And the areas of protected wildlife on Java Island is minuscule. It's tiny.
Yeah, especially Java. I mean, Java is overpopulated, right? So that's not a secret.
No, and so I'm wondering who's responsible for protecting the protected areas, and how are they doing this? Are there licenses that are issued to kind of...
Well, I guess it comes...
Or are they all illegal?
It comes down to the same thing, like greasing, right? So you grease hands, and then suddenly you have a few hectares of land on a formerly protected area.
In a national protected park area. And, you know, from the area where I leave to go trekking, and it's a long trek. It's from the Bogor side of Taman Nasional Halimun Salak all the way across the reserve to Sukabumi side. Yeah. So it's quite a long way, and I frequently come across poachers in that trek.
Oh, really?
And just 2 weekends ago, I stumbled across 4 guys who were hunting in that area. I believe it was for the pangolin area. They wouldn't give me much information. They said they're just taking moss, but they had these big bags that were filled with obviously wildlife.
Oh, really? So they were not shooting boars, like wild boars, which is kind of common.
No, they were definitely these were small
Okay.
They were inside a bag, and but I saw one of the big Hessian bags, and there was definitely something that was alive inside of it.
So they would sell them off on these animal
On the
food
black market.
Black
yeah.
market.
Now,
Okay.
pangolins, you know what pangolins are?
Yeah, yeah.
These small-scaled kind of anteater type mammals that are there. They've intercepted gangs of people in Sukabumi before, and there was an estimated, I read somewhere, 33,000 of these things that have allegedly been sort of sold off on the black market.
Yeah.
Mostly to China,
Yeah.
who believe that there is some sort of medicinal value in the scales of the pangolin.
Well, there was this one story about where China was trying to push the blame over to Indonesia, to these pangolins, originating like or kind of like causing the entire outbreak of the coronavirus.
And there is some legitimacy to that story, actually,
Yeah.
because
Are they carriers? Do they carry?
yeah, definitely. And in fact, they sequenced the DNA structure of this particular coronavirus, the CoV-SARS-2 virus that causes COVID-19, and it was a 99% match for the coronavirus that is found in Sunda pangolin.
So the question is that 1% enough to?
Well, I don't know that we're certain about the origins of that, but one of the things that we do know is that the lack of control on trading in illegal wildlife is a
absolutely.
massive problem.
Yeah.
I've got some great video of stumbling across different sort of primate species in that area, mainly the Javan lutung and the silvery gibbons as well. And they're horrendously endangered. One pair occupies an area of land that's about 60 square kilometres. Did you know that silvery gibbons, one pair of silvery gibbons, occupy territorially an area of about 66 square kilometres?
Okay.
So there are, one estimate suggests that it's unlikely that the Javan silvery gibbons will survive the next decade.
Wow.
They're that endangered, critically endangered.
Okay.
And that's devastating. You know, it's devastating, habitat loss, poaching, a range of other things. It's ultimately, Indonesia's environmental sustainability is at the top of my top 5 list. Because I think it will ultimately determine the sustainability of every other aspect of Indonesia for the next generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so where do we go from here? Like, how does Indonesia move forward? What do you think? I mean, we know the problems. We also know the beauty. Like, I for example, I think one of the most amazing things here is the climate.
Sure.
Like, for me, like the reason for me coming back here and enjoying it so much was just the weather.
I mean, you and I have consistently marveled. Now, we live in an area that's quite spectacular. The national park surrounding Gunung Tangkubang Perahu and Gunung Burangrang and this area all around there. Could you just imagine? I mean, I've trekked through almost the entirety of that area over the last 8 years. But could you just imagine how much of an ecotourism bonanza that would be? I mean,
absolutely.
it is so remarkably spectacular that both for local tourism, if it was managed well and managed sustainably, it would bring great prosperity to this entire region.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's let down by corruption.
Yeah.
It's let down by a lack of management, a lack of planning and coordination, and all of the things that frustrate us about Indonesia. And what I have is a lot of hope that eventually, and hopefully soon, sooner rather than later, that the next generation of more aware, more educated, more sustainably focused young Indonesian people will drive a lot of these solutions.
Yeah.
So I have some kind of hope, and I think that that's the point, is that I see great prosperity coming out of Indonesia's environmental sustainability.
Yeah.
But the way that we're going, not so. I mean, I remember the first time I went to the summit of Rinjani in Lombok.
Yeah.
One of the most spectacular places of the world I've ever seen, right? Out of 103 countries that I've visited, it still marvels me the diversity and beauty of Indonesia.
Maybe explain what it is. It's a mountain.
Yeah, Rinjani is a mountain. It's 3,726 meters above sea level.
That's very specific.
It's very specific. I've climbed it 4 or 5 times now. It's a spectacular climb, and the view is just astonishing.
Yeah.
And the first time I was there, I was just miserably appalled at literally tons and tons of trash that was left by tour operators and others who just go up there, they take big groups, they just throw the stuff over the cliff.
Yeah.
And there was a backlash from the international community who sort of said, spread the word out, just everyone stop going there.
Yeah.
Just vote with our feet until they deal with the sustainability of that mountain. No one go. And it's what happened. And then in March or April, one season about 5 or 6 years ago, they sent the military up there, like thousands of troops.
Wow.
And they just cleaned the place up. There was a lot of stuff that they couldn't get to.
Yeah.
But they took something like 80 ton of rubbish
Wow.
off the mountainside. And
That's like Mount Everest proportions. Almost.
Yeah, it was, and this is the frustrating thing.
Yeah.
It's such a spectacular place. It would be such a tourist destination, and it's just an eminently solvable problem.
Yeah.
A little bit of training, licensing of tour guides. Provide the best ones with a good sustainable job. And that's what I hope for. I hope that many of these things. Indonesia has a strategy for 10 new Balis.
10 new Balis, yeah.
And it's a project to kind of replicate the development success of Bali.
Yeah.
And there are spectacular places, North Sumatra, Aceh, and Danau Toba in the north.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't call Bali the perfect blueprint for an island.
No, not in that sense, I guess. And
the island. I mean, don't get me wrong. The island's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's just the way it's been commercialized. It's just
sure, and it's a bit revolting, many parts of it.
Yeah.
But what you cannot debate is the reductions in poverty in Bali, the rise in the standard of living, the kind of opportunities in employment, in sustainable employment, have been quite phenomenal. About 70% of women in Indonesia are what we call vulnerably employed, i.e. they have no protections. They are subsistence workers, in paddy fields or in a warung or collecting recycled waste or one of those things. And this is the segment of the workforce that needs to be moved into more sustainable and more humane employment.
Yeah.
And I think that projects like this have got a lot of hope for that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, my personal perspective on these matters is like I more or less just watched it from the sidelines, thinking that Indonesia is a place for potential, but at the same time with a lot of self-inflicted wounds or barriers, if you want so. So, like in a sense, it's like
and that's probably even being kind.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge.
They're chopping off limbs at times.
It's such a rich place, like in terms of commodity, in terms of human capital, in terms of natural ecological beauty. It has everything.
Yeah.
There's this perfect Earth theory, which I've heard from I think NASA actually kind of created that the perfect planet would be like Indonesia. Like it's just the entire planet would be like Indonesia, and if it's well managed, despite having so many islands everywhere, it would be just a wonderful place.
Sure. Yeah.
So if Indonesia would be the entire world, it could be perfect. But of course, you cannot copy that because then you would also get all the downsides with it, and then it would be just a hellhole.
Have you heard of David Suzuki? He's a renowned environmentalist. Television personality from Canada, actually.
Yeah.
And I had a serendipitous meeting with him in Kenya, actually. I think it was Mombasa, actually. We got stuck in a hotel lobby waiting for transportation to the airport, and our flights were were both cancelled, and we chatted for hours and hours about the issue of Indonesia and its environmental sustainability, and it depressed me a little bit because he's kind of wandered off into the view that human beings are just we're destined for our own decimation.
Yeah.
That the earth will continue, but it probably won't involve humans. We will probably end up annihilating ourselves out of our own greed and ignorance.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you follow the current trajectory or current trajectories on certain issues, you could tell. Yeah, you would definitely.
I like to think that that we will. I know that we've arrived at several tipping points that are a little bit tragic.
Yeah.
But I would like to believe that there's a solution to some of this. But I think that Indonesia has got some things that are more urgent than political actors at the moment believe that they are.
Yeah.
And one of those is the rate of deforestation. It's alarming.
Yeah.
For the hour that we've been talking, there have been 2 football fields illegally logged, and that goes on 24 hours a day in Indonesia. That's the thing that alarms me the most. Is it's not irreversible, but we're talking about peat forests that took literally 1,000 years to develop.
At least.
Yeah. So and a square meter of peat forest under the ground is thousands of tons of carbon.
Yeah.
That have taken. And for those who don't know how it works, of course, it's a simple thing that we teach our children when we're walking in the jungle. That the leaves fall down out of the trees, branches fall and they drop, and that carbon gets locked in as that compresses over tens and hundreds and thousands of years. It gets pressed down and down and down and degrades into peat.
Yeah.
And that carbon is trapped under the ground there. And of course, when you slash and burn those forests, those peat fires burn underneath the soil for years, releasing that carbon into the atmosphere. And this is what alarms me the most. That is a problem that has to be taken under control. There's a great YouTube clip from several years ago where Harrison Ford interviewed the Minister for Forestry, the Forestry Minister, and it haunts me, his excuse, we're a young democracy, we still haven't, we're just new at this kind of, which is not really the case. It's about as old as Singapore is in that sense. Depending on where you take the starting, if you take the era of Reformasi as the beginning of Indonesia's democracy, then perhaps there's a point. But just to continually flout this as an excuse for something that's largely irreversible is something that bothers me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. Like, if you don't have a quick solution, then obviously either you are becoming an expert in creating excuses for why you can't do it.
And the solutions, and here's the thing about the solutions for Indonesia's environmental problems: renewable energy, deforestation, protection of marine ecosystems, and these kinds of things. The solutions are actually massive job creators. They're massive opportunities for Indonesia. But unfortunately, the corruption is at the heart of not allowing those solutions to come to life. Indonesia's energy is run by coal. I've seen with my own eyes the enormous geothermal resources that exist in many parts of Indonesia.
Well, this is the thing. I was surprised to hear that Indonesia is one of the biggest geothermal energy producers in the world right now.
Right, and it's still a
But
relatively small proportion.
Yeah,
It's
tiny.
tiny proportion.
The
It's
entire
less
country,
than 1%.
the entire country could run on geothermal energy easily.
Well, certainly a combination of solar, particularly
Yeah.
in the outlying sunny places
Yeah.
in the eastern part of Indonesia where
Yeah.
there's still a lot of land. Definitely wind in different
Yeah.
parts of Indonesia. Definitely tidal.
Yeah.
Definitely hydroelectric, and any other sorts of combinations, of course.
It's just the problem of financing it, right?
Well, it's largely the monopoly of the coal lobby,
Of course.
like in many other parts of the world. But I certainly I hold out hope that that these solutions will have life in the generation that's coming up now.
Well, either we solve these problems or these problems solve us. So there's either or. There's nothing in between. So this is kind of where we have to kind of understand that we're literally cutting off the branch we're sitting on. Not only the branch we're sitting on, we're actually kind of uprooting the entire tree we're sitting on.
I think that there's a lot of work that the international community could do to help solve these problems as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that that Western developed countries should be allowing importation of timber products that come from these locations.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean furniture, like these kinds of sort of products. I'm talking about paper pulp and paper products and these kinds of things. But I also think it might get to the point where there are economic sanctions against the perpetrators of deforestation. And I mean, these multinational companies are very adept at creating a degree of separation between themselves and the perpetrators, right?
Yeah.
We see it all the time. It's not us who fells the land, it's small landholders who we just buy their palm oil or so on and so on.
Yeah.
But I think that there needs to be some work done by international governments to kind of create sticks and carrots.
Yeah. Yet, or still, Indonesia is a country of opportunity. So
Undeniably.
Undeniably, yeah. I mean, I like it here also not just because of the weather and other beautiful things, but also like I can conduct my business here in a way that would be a lot harder in Europe for me.
Sure.
Or the way I personally do business, the way I personally kind of interact with my environment. For me, Indonesia feels like easier, more accessible, sort of simpler in a sense, because you have like, I don't know if it has to do with the way things are kind of run over here, but for me it feels like it's a bit like going from 10th grade school back to 5th grade school, and suddenly everything is much easier. But you have the knowledge of a 10th grader. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I understand. It's a little more in your field of enterprise. That's probably truer than for mine.
Yeah.
Which requires a lot of attention to regulation and everything that we do needs to be at an international standard of compliance and defensibility.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more problematic for us in that sense than it probably is for you. But you're right. One of the remarkably wonderful things about Indonesia is its youthfulness. 50% of the population are aged under 30.
Yeah.
And that's a demographic bonus that should absolutely be capitalized upon.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a different like feel for life over here, like compared to, in my case, Germany. Every time I'm back, it's like I'm just surrounded by elderly people. Like I go into a shopping mall. I mean, maybe larger cities like Berlin or Hamburg are different, like are the exception. But as soon as you go into the rural areas, it's just 50 plus on average.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas over here, you go into the rural areas and it's like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years old.
Yeah, sure, exactly, yeah.
Very different.
I mean, Indonesia still has got a long way to go in terms of longevity and life expectancy, though.
That's
It's tobacco has and continues to be right up there in terms of my top 5 problems confronting Indonesia, and not just from the health aspects as well, but it's a devastating curse that the big international tobacco companies have left Indonesia with.
Yeah.
Tobacco is the number 2 household expense for the country, for the entire country.
Number 2.
Number 2 next to rice. So the average Indonesian family will spend more on tobacco by a factor of 10 than they would on nutrition, protein, healthcare, education, any of these other elements as well. It's also the leading cause of poverty as well. Imagine this, 50 million Indonesian men spend more than 80% of their income on tobacco alone.
Yeah. That's a great business opportunity.
So, yeah, well, listen, it's a business opportunity that the tobacco companies have already exploited, and they're well on the way to it.
Yeah.
It's absolutely the most profitable business in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Indonesia's wealthiest men are all in the tobacco industry.
Yeah, the top 5.
They're all coming from tobacco.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're nowhere on any Forbes list, right? For some reason.
Oh no, they're all on the Forbes.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, they're all there. They're big players. They're multi-billionaires several times over. Certainly. Now, of course, we don't really know the true nature of their wealth as well. I read one report where the tobacco companies alone in Indonesia. This issue of tax amnesty is a fascinating one. Every few years since I've been living here, the Indonesian government have sort of said, if you haven't been declaring anything as tax, we'll give you an amnesty. Pay a tiny, like 0.5% fine, and you can repatriate the money here or declare it and therefore use it. The tobacco companies alone consistently are declaring billions and billions of dollars in income that they have not necessarily declared during those tax amnesties. So we don't know the true nature of their stuff, but we can do some rough calculations, and we know that it's the tobacco industry is roughly, tobacco sales are in the order of $250 million a day.
Yeah. Wow.
So 100 million smokers spending on average like 2 packets of cigarettes a day at something like 20,000 rupiah.
Yeah, $2 ish.
Yeah, and do the math on that.
Yeah.
That takes us to an extraordinary amount of income. So we know that it's there, but it's the leading cause of childhood malnutrition, of stunting.
Well,
of
that
poverty.
alone is a topic on its own.
Sure.
I think like around this whole smoking and health, because we haven't spoken about health, and we haven't spoken about like the entire like effects of the pandemic on Indonesia, because that's very interesting as well. But I guess that may be something we should do on another time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, because I think that would be at least 1 hour, like another hour of talking, because
tobacco it's a whole topic in itself.
You've done research and all this.
Yeah,
right?
sure. We worked for a couple of years on a variety of issues related to tobacco, and I think we should save it for another time.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, Shaun, it's been a great pleasure having you here.
Thanks, Ali. It's nice. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
Hopefully
my very
first balanced.
My very first podcast. What do you think,
Here's
guys?
to many more.
So maybe...
Aren't you supposed to do those default things? Don't forget to click the
do that for me.
Don't forget to click the subscribe button down below, and there's some other thing, a bell or buzzer, notifications.
Oh, the bell notification.
Because I think it does something, right? If you click on notifications.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you click on that, you get a push notification if we upload a video, you get a push notification. So subscribe and click the bell button so you get notified when part 2 is coming out.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some more interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Ali.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Oh, no, sorry.
How are you going to do that? Where's the hand sanitizer? Give me the hand sanitizer.
Okay, hand sanitizer!